Thank you so much, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. You have an incredible program put together yesterday and today. Even though Mark did not give me details about what he wanted me to speak about, he did give me the agenda. And so I saw that you were involved in a bunch of amazing things between yesterday and today. So I'm very happy to be included in it. And I'm going to speak about my work as the director of the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights, and then I'm going to make sure to leave lots of times for questions because I feel like this group is going to have a lot of insightful questions and specific things that you are interested in hearing about. And so I don't want to talk generally, I want to talk specifically about the issues that you all are concerned with. So great to meet you, and I'm excited to be here. So I saw from the agenda that Mark sent that the theme of this convening is Out of Many, One, a seminar on embracing cross-cultural diversity. And as the director of the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights, I believe that there is no more important goal at this moment in New Jersey, in this country, or even in the world. It feels like every morning we wake up to new horrors caused by hate and persistent othering. So 50 people killed while praying at the Al-Noor Mosque in Linwood, at the Al-Noor Mosque and the Linwood Mosque in Christchurch, New Zealand, 11 people killed while praying at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, a 17% increase in hate crime reported numbers to the FBI across the country between 2016 and 2017. That was the third consecutive year of an increase in the number of hate crimes, and it was the largest individual spike since right after September 11th, when there was a large spike in hate crimes against Muslim Americans. And the reported spike in New Jersey was even greater, where there were 495 hate crime incidents reported to the FBI in 2017, and that was a 76% increase over 2016. That doesn't mean that New Jersey had, and that was the fourth largest number across the country. That doesn't actually mean that New Jersey has more hate crimes that happen than in 46 other states. It's all just about reported data, so what is reported to the FBI. Many localities don't actually report any hate crimes data to the FBI. So the city of Miami, for example, reported 0 hate crimes for 2017, and the state of Mississippi reported 1. And that's not because there are no hate crimes that are occurring in those places. It's about how much are reported to the FBI. But even if it is that in New Jersey we are getting better at increasing reporting, I think that it is difficult to disagree with the fact that it seems like a wave of hate has been unleashed in the past several years, and that things that didn't used to seem possible or acceptable to see in public are now happening. So in New Jersey, just in the past year, reports of swastikas and racist graffiti found scrawled on school bathroom stalls, racist and homophobic slurs etched onto plaques near a high school baseball field, nooses found hanging in people's offices, words of hate and beer cans hurled at Jews walking to synagogue. And this seems really like an onslaught of attack on individuals because of what they look like, how they worship, or who they love. And then on the other end of the coin, we have the federal government really stepping back from what had been a major role in civil rights enforcement. And so every state has civil rights laws that it enforces, but the federal government also has very strong civil rights laws that in the past had been a huge priority for enforcement and seems to no longer be that same kind of priority. And so to give you some examples, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development suspended a rule that required it to affirmatively address segregated housing patterns. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau said that it was not going to enforce laws that prohibit race discrimination in mortgage lending. The Department of Education revoked guidance that was meant to address racial disparities in school discipline. And that even though a report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office last year found that Black students account for 15.5% of public school students nationwide, but 39% of student suspensions. So that's an overrepresentation of 23 percentage points. And the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, which is a bipartisan agency that's charged with advising the President and Congress on matters of civil rights, expressed, and I quote, "grave concerns about continuing signals from the current administration that the protection and fulfillment of civil rights of all persons will not be appropriately prioritized, which could result in a dangerous reduction of civil rights enforcement around the country, leaving communities of color, LGBT people, older people, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups exposed to greater risk of discrimination." And that group, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, actually held a public hearing about this in Washington several months ago. In other areas, it seems like the federal government is affirmatively seeking to harm New Jersey residents. So when it comes to immigration, that is obviously well known, that the federal government is going after immigrants in a way that has not happened for the past many years. And before I stepped into this role as the director of the Division on Civil Rights, I was a counsel to the Attorney General working on civil rights and immigration matters. And in that capacity, I litigated a case where New Jersey stepped in to defend the legality of DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Texas and several other states challenged DACA and argued that it has been illegal since it was originally promulgated, which was in 2012, so a long time ago. And the federal government said, yes, we agree with you, it's illegal, we are trying to get rid of it. And so New Jersey intervened as a defendant to defend the legality of DACA, and we were able to convince the judge in Texas not to grant what's called a preliminary injunction, but basically just means not to cancel DACA last summer. And so Texas last summer was saying, this is an emergency, DACA is harming us, we need you to end it right now. And we were able to come in and say, it's obviously not an emergency because it's been in place since 2012, and they only filed this lawsuit in May of 2008. They filed in, I think, March of 2018. And so we were able to come in and say, it's been almost 6 years. It's obviously not an emergency. If it was an emergency, they would have filed a long time ago. And the judge actually issued a more than 100-page decision, which explained in great detail why he thought that DACA was illegal, because they filed before a judge that had already found a very similar program illegal, and so he wrote a very long opinion explaining why he thought that DACA was illegal, but why he agreed with us that it obviously was not an emergency if it took them 6 years to file. And so he did not end DACA last summer. And there's still obviously, you read about Congress maybe taking it up, maybe not taking it up, the Supreme Court maybe taking it up, maybe not taking it up. It's still by no means settled. But the fact that it was not ended as of last August, we were very excited about. In other examples, the Department of Health and Human Services announced a plan to try to define transgender individuals out of existence by defining sex as only the biological sex that you are born with. And the Department of Justice told the Supreme Court earlier this year that Title VII, which prohibits discrimination in employment because of sex, did not protect a transgender woman who refused to wear a man's suit to work. Because according to the Department of Justice, Congress would not have recognized transgender people when it enacted the law in 1964. So what do we do at the Division on Civil Rights and at the Attorney General's office more broadly? The Division on Civil Rights is the state agency that's charged with enforcing the New Jersey law against discrimination. And the New Jersey law against discrimination is the first state-level civil rights statute since Reconstruction, and it is still one of the broadest. It prohibits discrimination in employment, housing, contracting, and places of public accommodation. A place of public accommodation is basically any place that's open to the public. So it could be a business, a hospital, a movie theater, a government office, a court, any place that's open to the public. And the law prohibits discrimination on the basis of race and religion and gender and sexual orientation and gender identity and expression and disability and age and a whole bunch of protected characteristics. And the law created the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights in order to be the state agency that enforces the law. And the law was actually remarkably forward-thinking in 1945 when it did that, because it set forth in the statute that the division was not only supposed to enforce the law by accepting and prosecuting complaints of violations, so I'll explain more what that means, but also by proactively trying to prevent acts of bias and discrimination from occurring in the first place. And so when it comes to accepting complaints, anyone who believes that they have been discriminated against in employment or housing or a place of public accommodation or contracting, as I mentioned, can file a complaint with our office, and we investigate complaints. And when we believe that discrimination has occurred, we will prosecute the violation either in court or in an administrative procedure. And we also are very often able to arrange mutually agreeable dispositions that are agreeable both to the respondent and to the complainant once the respondent understands more about what the law against discrimination requires. And we can also initiate our own investigations. So if an individual does not come to us with a specific complaint, but we hear about something from the media or from an advocacy group or from an elected official or from another division of state government or from concerned citizens like you, we can open what's called a director-initiated investigation and look into those allegations as well. But separately from that, the law also set forth that we're supposed to be acting proactively to prevent bias and discrimination from occurring in the first place. And so what that means for us is legislative changes, thinking of ways that the law against discrimination can be strengthened, regulations. So we have the authority to promulgate regulations which clarify how the law against discrimination applies in particular circumstances, guidance documents, so kind of explaining to employers and housing providers, this is what the law against discrimination requires, this is what you can and cannot do, this is how it applies in particular circumstances, because that's not always clear. Events and conferences and reports on issues that are important to civil rights to raise the public profile of these issues, and then also trainings. So we provide trainings to employers and members of the public and those looking for affordable housing, kind of all across the spectrum on what the law against discrimination requires. And we're also trying to be very strategic and proactive about hate when we see it. And this is something that we all should be doing. So there are ways that the government can address this, and then there are ways that all of us can address this. And the government needs to be vigorously prosecuting bias crimes wherever they occur, recognizing that an act of hate against any one of our communities is a threat against everyone. But all of us need to call out hateful comments from our leaders when we hear them and push back against anyone who accepts hate or anger or division as a normal part of our political rhetoric. When it comes to our civil rights investigations, they're not the same as criminal investigations. And I want to explain a little bit about why, because I think it provides additional context into how we are trying to prevent these incidents from occurring, not only once, but next time. And so, for example, if an employee finds a noose hanging from his locker at work, that could in theory both be a bias crime and a violation of the law against discrimination. When the police are investigating, they're looking for who hung the noose and should that person be criminally prosecuted. When we are investigating, we are looking at, did the employer know that there was a racially hostile work environment? And did the employer take the steps necessary to address that? And if not, what would make the employer take the steps necessary to address that next time. And so, for example, the same thing if a swastika is found in a school. We're looking for, did the school know that there was a religiously hostile school environment and take the steps necessary? And if it didn't, then we can require affirmative policy changes to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So that can be anti-bias training for employees or teachers or students. It could be a new policy that spells out how to report acts of harassment or discrimination or bias and how those reports will be internally investigated. It can also include money damages to the victim and statutory penalties. And one of the things that we're thinking about is how we can be creative with remedies. What kinds of training can we require in order to broaden our reach and to make sure that things like this are not happening again after they've occurred once. We are also, as part of our more proactive work, trying to look statewide at what kinds of trainings and policies might help all of us to understand and overcome our own stereotyped thinking. So we just had, actually in our office yesterday, an incredible implicit bias training that really was fantastic. And I don't know if you've discussed, it seems very relevant to the topic that you are discussing, but I'm not sure if you have discussed it directly. If you have not, there's a project called Project Implicit at Harvard that has what they call the IAT test, the implicit association tests, and they now have I think 25 of them. You can go online and take them. They take about 5 minutes. And each one, so you can take one that explains how you feel about gay versus straight people, or how you feel about Asian American versus European American faces. It is basically, it pops up with things on the screen and you have to click on various buttons, and while you are doing that, the computer is able to tell whether you have an association between gay and good, straight and bad, or vice versa, based on how you're trying to put these things into categories. And so if you haven't tried it, I would really recommend that you take a look at it. It's really eye-opening. And I think that it helps all of us to kind of think about what we can be doing to understand and overcome our own stereotyped thinking, and have the difficult conversations that are necessary to break down barriers and to foster mutual love and respect. I have been speaking on this for the past several months since I started, and I've grown to really not like the word tolerance, because I feel like it implies that we are all just tolerating each other, that it's very difficult for us to tolerate each other, and so we're overcoming something that's making us just tolerate each other. So I don't think that's what we should be aiming for. I think what we should be aiming for is really acknowledging our mutual humanity and accepting all of us for who we are, because we are all created in the image of God. We all have amazing things to offer, and I think that the word tolerance implies that there is something negative about that we need to overcome in order to merely tolerate each other. That's why I think the purpose of this meeting that you are all having could not be more important than it is today. As Nelson Mandela taught, no one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite.